the time. What was your reaction to what came out from the State Capture Commission yesterday?
Well, good morning, Desiree. You can imagine that is information now being stated under oath. We had gotten a good preview, if we were to call it that, on Monday, when the then chairperson of the high-level panel, which was reviewing shenanigans and ongoings at the State Security Agency, Dr. Sidi Mufumadi, had appeared. So what makes this testimony significant is that it is under oath. Some of the issues canvassed are not entirely new, per se. I mean, you look at the issue around Manduli Zuma, questions of money going missing from State Security Agency offices, questions of arms going missing and no one knowing where those guns ended up. So these are not new issues in their entirety. Of course, if you look at the cumulative amounts that we are talking about, 9 billion rands, that can't be accounted for. An agent taking in the excess of 200 million rands to run whatever operations and is not able to account fully for that money. So it really demonstrates the rot that was within the State Security Agency, but demonstrates really how compromised our intelligence services. As you will know, Desiree, that even in the crime intelligence at SABC, there have been a lot of reports on how resources were abused, people abused their power, people imposed political agendas, and for the benefit at times of factions within the ANC, and or at times for the benefit of the ANC when it confronts supposedly its enemies in terms of those who oppose it or those who agitate for a different cause within our society. So that testimony was significant, but it was unsurprising because we have been here before. We have seen journalists being harassed. We have seen journalists complaining that their conversations are listened to. Way back, if you remember, Mzilikazi wa Africa was nabbed from the offices of his then newspaper and, ended up in some location that he went without his own consent. So, I mean, this is quite demonstrable in the testimonies that we have been hearing over the years from activists complaining about how they are being harassed and how their information is being intercepted. But it's very important to finally get it from an authoritative person such as the acting chief director general, and doing so under oath.
In fact, the very stories you're referring to that came out in the newspapers that led to the formation of an investigation into the Commission of Inquiry into ethical challenges facing journalism at the moment. So these stories, you know how they say there's the pebbles before the stones. So these stories have been part of our discourse for a while now. It's just we're getting detail now.
Absolutely, Desiree. And I think what is going to be significant from these testimonies is how do we actually pluck out the rot within all these areas that have been mentioned, whether you are talking about in the media, suspected journalists, some as you would know, have taken a leave of absence from journalism, like Ranjeni Munsami when she was mentioned before the commission, and then she sought to cross-examine at some point, and then she abandoned that because she would have had to put her own version on the record. And we are still eagerly anticipating that. And of course, no doubt she ends up in the Minister of Finance office. And that tells you that, as much as we are talking about a new arrangement in government and a new ethos of governing, it still seems those that govern are not really paying enough attention to the Commission of Inquiry, or they simply do not care for some of the allegations that are there if somebody like Ranjeni would find herself now employed in the ministry's office there in the Department of Finance. Now, Desiree, another important issue is allegations around some judges that there may have been informants in the judiciary. Whether those informants are truly just judges or people who work within the judiciary system, I think things like that need to be resolved quickly because it attacks the credibility of such an important arm of the state, which we have safeguarded for years and celebrated its independence. Of course, judges themselves are fallible. Judges themselves have appetites that, are materialistic and otherwise. And so some are susceptible to such conduct of succumbing to overtures made by those who may want to give them resources for nefarious purposes. But I think what is important is to see Is there enough of are there enough of checks and balances in the system to make sure that we can root out those implicated people, even if for purposes of security reasons, people cannot be named, as we have seen. Even the Mufumadi report, it's a redacted report that is in the public domain. But where do we get to see the action and people being held accountable? It's not enough for people to simply be alleged to have done something. We need to clean house in all of these institutions because they are such important democracy-supporting institutions.
I agree with you. It's all good and well to root it out, but to show that there are changes happening. You know, you've established already in the conversation that some of these are not new revelations. It's things that we've been talking about for a while now. But just in terms of Loyiso Jafta, the acting Director General in the SSA, saying that the organization has been used for political and private interests for years now. In terms of the credibility of his assertions, what's your sense there? Is he a credible witness, for lack of a better word?
Well, Desiree, that we will leave to the chairperson of the commission, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, to determine. You will remember that as witnesses come before the commission also has a whole army of investigators who then follow up. But there seems to be some collaborating evidence between Jafta and Mufumadi, which then begins to say those who feel aggrieved by that evidence must avail themselves, cross-examine if they so wish, and avail their own version of events on the record. What I find a point of concern, probably point of caution, is that the world of intelligence, as Jafta noted and remarked to the chairperson, that in the real world, chairperson, things are tough, you know, and he was making this in reference to the issue that legislatively you ought to inform a person after you had intercepted their communication that you had done so. But in terms of, in some instances, it's difficult to do that because you might be informing a sleeper agent who's doing counterintelligence on you, and it would defeat purpose entirely as to why you are doing intelligence in the very first instance. So in that, within that scope of reality, we can then say, well, we might not be getting the full picture either. We might be getting a factionalized version within the intelligence circle. And that's well and good. Other people must come and provide their version. Where I have a point of caution is that, you know, spies, once we allow room to be governed by narratives that come from, you know, ordinarily what operates in the underworld at times or in the shadows of the state, we might compromise even the discourse at our nation at the expense of these spies who are pushing their own agendas. And of course, Desiree, you can see, I mean, Jafta has been acting there in that position for almost 3 years. What is so difficult with appointing him? We know that it has been reported before in 2019 that he was fighting with the Minister Ayanda Dlodlo, and that could be counting to why he has not been appointed full-time. That could be counting to why, in fact, Minister Dlodlo wanted to try and block his testimony yesterday until she had satisfied herself on the questions that she was raising via senior counsel advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza. So it's not clear-cut to say you just believe this version uncritically. I think we need to be vigilant. We are entering uncharted waters where in the public discourse we might be dominated by narratives and counter-narratives that come from people who usually operate on the shadows of the state. And I find that extremely delicate and potentially dangerous for our democracy. So we will have to be very vigilant and listen attentively, but also call those who discredit people who appear before the commission to apply for cross-examination and give their version of events.
How valid or legitimate are Minister Dlodlo's reasons for wanting, seeking to stop this evidence that has subsequently taken place?
Well, I mean, they are expected. Nobody wants any item of state security lingering in the public domain. And somebody might say, well, some of these things are part of the Mufumadi report, but we know very few people probably read and interacted with that report, with the commission being so publicly, aired. You know that the reach of the testimony is going to be so wide. So on the one hand, you'll then say, well, you understand where she's coming from, whether or not it is enough to stop the testimony. Well, as we saw yesterday, it was not enough. And of course, people are always trying to safeguard narrative because, as you can see, Desiree, part of this has nothing to do with individuals and private interests. Part of the problem is that day in, day out, the ANC is becoming more and more implicated as having benefited from all this particular conduct within the state. So even those who claim that they are clean, the monies that they were using in some instances to campaign for elections flow from these nefarious operations such as those seen at the State Security Agency. And the ANC has been very wary to appear as though they are on trial in this commission. If you remember, then when Gwede Mantashe appeared before the commission saying, well, the ANC is not on trial, but they will appear to assist. But with the evidence and the benefit of all the witnesses that have come before the Zondo Commission now, we can say the ANC itself is on trial. And I think that is the most problematic issue for somebody such as Ayanda Dlodlo, to have the ANC implicated, and to a point where the luck of the president and his National Executive Committee is running out, insofar as saying, well, they were not aware. And of course, this is now a new dispensation and they are trying to do things right. But the evidence is not there. Only recently, the president appointed a task team to oversee the implementation of the recommendations from the Mufumadi panel, which tells you that there is a bit of feet dragging if almost 2 years later, more than 2 years later, they have not actually satisfied themselves that the recommendations from that panel have been implemented.
We're continuing this conversation, asking our viewers today how they feel about these developments, and consistently sentiment coming through that we are not seeing arrests being made, no consequence, no consequences in terms of these actions. 125 million going missing, unaccounted for. Do you think we're going to see any activities from the law enforcement agencies? Very difficult one. If I followed Jafta's testimony well yesterday, I got the sense that what they are most concerned about is recovering the monies that have been lost to the SSA, and he indicated that they don't write off the debt. So because the person would have benefited if they've used the money for a house and so on and all of those things. And I suppose what also ties them in a way is that if you go to court, part of what the court will ask for is what systems were in place, what checks and balances, what controls did you put to ensure that there's no abuse of the system. And then what you will see is that institutionally there was a track back in terms of good governance, systems and controls were collapsed, and therefore people could do as they please with the monies that they were given. So it might not be clear-cut that you would have winnable cases before the court, particularly if there is demonstrable weakness on an institutional basis. And I think, Desiree, that is why they are probably more trying to recoup the resources and then probably lay off some people from work and dismiss them or release them from the work of the State Security Agency. But on this particular one, I don't think arrests will come easily, because once arrests come easily, then matters go before court. And of course, there will be greater ventilation of more issues that may be seen as a threat to national security. So I think this one, very difficult to get accountability in the form of arrest as we might so wish. Lukhona, just a quick one. Looking ahead to today, that unidentified witness coming through, can we expect some more explosive testimony coming through?
Well, I mean, the fact that the identity of the witness is concealed, it means that they are probably treated as some form of insider and whistleblower within SSA. And definitely we should expect some more damning evidence, if not strengthening evidence to what we have already seen. And without a doubt, I think we are all waiting with great anticipation to hear exactly what part of the evidence that particular witness is going to convey.
Thank you so much for talking to us as we chase the hour 10 o'clock, when proceedings for today will be starting at the State Capture Commission. Let's take a break.